Another place is just judging philosophies. If you look at CX judges and LV judges, you can just type in Judging Philosophies Wiki in Google, and you'll get a list of people saying what arguments they do or don't like, and how they like to judge, because in those events you often get to have more control over who judges you than it being completely random. While in and of itself that may not seem to mean much, a lot of these people will actually take the time to post fairly lengthy comments about why they do or don't like certain kinds of arguments, why they do or don't think certain kinds of arguments are true, or why they think debaters should confront or avoid certain kinds of arguments because of the way they have to evaluate them as judges. And those, even if you don't cite them directly, can be good food for thought as far as what will this do in the mind of a judge who has to listen to this hypothetical topic that we might get if we vote for this side of the resolution. Or what will stop us from learning if we can't debate about this topic because we voted for that side of the resolution. So those are both things that can be factored in from judging philosophy. Another big thing to look at, I think one of the major arguments for the process, is the whole switch-side debate controversy. And by switch-side debate controversy, I mean arguments about debate itself and whether it should be with two assigned sides, everybody expected to learn and debate both sides, because that's not always the way it was. Back in the first half of the 20th century, there was really just policy debate, which was fairly similar to PF today, and there was parliamentary debate. Neither one actually existed in much of a contest round tournament form. What you would have instead is different schools get together, groups of people who want to debate, and offer to or challenge another school to debate. And at that point, they would each pick their sides ahead of time, and they would have one lengthy debate on that topic, or maybe several short debates on the same topic in front of different crowds. The result of this was, if they both agreed on the same side of the topic, they didn't have the debate. If neither was willing to take a certain side, the debate just didn't happen. So as a result, you would see people taking sides they believed, or at least sides they felt had merit. What ended up happening in the 1940s, 1950s is policy debate developed into a much more competitive activity. An activity where you actually saw people having tournaments with multiple rounds, flipping for sides, getting each side, having to learn both sides, having to debate both sides. Topics became standardized and lasted the entire school year. So as a result of that, you actually started having to research both sides of the debate, which made things a little bit more complicated. Now, in the 1950s, there were a couple of things going on. In the debate world, one of the best known and most successful schools was the USMA, West Point. Outside of the debate world, what was going on was the Red Scare, the McCarthy era, all of that. If you were suspected of being communist at all, having sympathy for communists, having sympathy for socialists, having talked to a socialist back in college, you were likely to be blacklisted for pretty much an indefinite amount of time, or until McCarthy lost all credibility, whichever came first. And as a result of that, a lot of people were really surprised when the 1954 topic involved engagement with China, which, for those of you who stayed awake from history class know, didn't happen until Richard Nixon a couple decades later. So, as a result of that, you actually saw West Point refuse to debate the topic. There were people who said students who debate this topic should be expelled. We cannot debate this topic. One side is immoral. You cannot expect us to debate against our personal beliefs. West Point, Annapolis, the Air Force Academy, and several other sympathizing schools simply withdrew entirely, refused to debate that topic. So that created the first big controversy about switch side debate. A second major controversy that talked about this happened in 1991 at Liberty University, which was then televangelist Jerry Falwell's university. And the topic at that point dealt with several Supreme Court cases, one of which was Roe v. Wade, which is, of course, the case about states' rights to restrict abortion laws. And Liberty University has a fairly strict code of conduct, one of the parts of which is you cannot support abortion in any way, shape, or form while on our campus. We will expel you. And what actually happened was there was a dispensation given out to the team to compete that year. The coach at the time was, I want to say O'Donnell, but the name escapes me, a fairly prominent Republican strategist who also coached Liberty. And they decided that it was more important for them to be able to debate the topic than for them to stick to the code of conduct entirely. And they got a special dispensation just for that year to debate the topic. And part of this was because the university actually had some faith in their students and some faith in their side. They were the people who were for and against this issue, both had to debate both sides. Their students' faith would not be swayed. They would still believe the side that they knew to be true after researching both sides. And the side that was wrong would look at their side, would have to debate their side, and would come out of it saying, okay, well, I've looked at the arguments of both sides, maybe this side is right. And that is one major argument for switch side debate. The arguments that were made before then about not betraying your ideals are mainly arguments against the concept of switch side debate. This came up again in the 1990s, early 2000s, with Fort Hayes, with Louisville, with Towson in the world of policy debate, and there's lots of evidence you can find just called switch side debate is good, switch side debate is bad, that can be fairly useful from that. Other places you can look are perhaps just public debates about religious content in English or social studies curricula. And those can be fairly useful simply because they're talking about the consequences of these for students. Furthermore, another area of research that might be fairly useful to look into, even if you won't get a ton of cards out of it, would just be different religions and different sects' views on debate, especially as it pertains to issues that are sensitive to them. For instance, there are groups such as the Jesuits or the Quakers or Baha'i who feel that you don't actually understand your beliefs until they have been challenged. If your faith hasn't been tested, then it's not actually faith. You actually encourage debates on issues that matter to them and contrast that with other religions that simply don't believe that dissent has any place in a religious atmosphere, to show whether they're compatible or not, depending on which side you are in. And that could influence whether or not it has to confront all sensitive religious issues, just intelligently pick which one. Again, this goes back to the fact that Khan does not need to argue that it should confront all sensitive religious issues, just that it should be able to, and to be able to give some examples of ones that it could, whereas Pro is arguing more that sensitive religious issues as a whole, whatever their interpretation then may be, should be outright not considered for topics. So I think that allows a little more nuance on the con side, whereas so far the pro side has been the one striving for a more nuanced look on it. Aside from that, another thing would just be to actually look at past PF topics and see which of them actually have different religions taking stances on those controversies. Because with the possible exception of the NBA jerseys topic, no matter what you pick, there's going to be some religion that has some opinion on it published somewhere. And knowing that history and knowing how that did or didn't play into the debate could be important for either side. Anyhow, though, as I said, those sources are just ways that you could find evidence, so I think this would be less evidence-driven than many other topics. I think hypothetical situations, metaphors, examples are all going to be much more useful as a whole. Overall, I think that Khan actually has the easier job on this one. Speaking first has the advantage kind of diminished on a topic like this, while speaking second actually has some disadvantages amplified. It's again, less evidence-heavy topic. So if your evidence is better, and the other team speaks after you with worse evidence, and the judge knows your evidence is better, then it doesn't matter so much. But if your example is better, and the other team has a chance to attack your example again, or to go after your example, or to provide a counterexample, then speaking second becomes a lot more important. Speaking first still has some slight advantages, in that it gets to spin every crossfire right after it happens, but aside from that, it's still going to come down to two different lists of hypothetical topics, or two different worlds, or two different visions of what public forum debate should be in high school. And the ability to build your world back up after they're done talking, or the ability to tear their world down after they don't have a chance to defend it anymore, is pretty useful. So I would say that overall, Khan has a slightly easier time, and speaking second is probably better off than first for either side on this topic. But again, it's not a massive imbalance just because of that. Aside from that, overall, Pro wants to talk mainly about the event itself, wants to talk about a very narrow, very specific definition of what a sensitive religious issue is, explain most of Khan's objections are not sensitive religious issues, or why they are bad debate topics for other reasons than the religious issue. Wants to focus on examples, specifics, and actually talk about, okay, these topics are okay, this is why this is a bad idea to debate. On the other hand, what Khan's side wants to do is just talk about why switch side debate is good, why you should confront things that you disagree with, why debate should be controversial, why trying to avoid controversy in religion is different than avoiding controversy in anything else, and many of the arguments along those lines. Again, both sides have access to nuance in different ways, as I've talked about earlier, but overall I think the slight edge goes to the Khan side on this topic, which I think is kind of what the NFL had in mind when they went ahead and made this a reaction to the previous topic's rejection by a lot of people in the community. Overall, I would say that this topic is going to change things. Like I said, there's three big problems that confront anybody trying to debate this topic, but there's also one or maybe two opportunities that everybody will get out of it. I don't think I would like to see this topic every month, but I think it's going to expand a lot of people's horizons, make a lot of people approach how they debate differently, just because of how this topic makes people actually think differently. Again, some experience in LD or some experience in parliamentary debate will probably go a long way to helping with this, but if you're going to look for cards or other kinds of debates to help you with this, policy debates, files on which side good or bad from Towson, Louisville, Fort Hays, West Point, Liberty, what have you, are all going to be fairly handy. That's about all I have on this one. Again, any questions, stick in the comments. Sorry this broke into two parts. Facebook does not like it when I try to upload this in one large chunk. Take care. Let me know if you have any questions.